Sacre bleu, allez bleu, what a victory for the French today. I was right behind them. Uruguay don't do it for me, though they are a football phenomenon. And they are a very small country, even smaller than my own country of Scotland. And in the last hour, we're going to discuss that most vexed of questions. Why are so many Scottish people wearing Viking hats this weekend and backing the traditional anyone but England? It's a vexed question, and me and Lou Macari, who've earned our living in the south for most of our lives, are going to discuss it. Doesn't mean we're any less Scottish, just means that maybe we've got a bit more grace. 0344 499 1000, that's the number to call. Or you can text me, text the word talk, and then your message to 87222. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk, and if it's all working properly, you could be watching the live stream of the entire show tonight on the website, talkradio.co.uk. I wore my best bib and tucker just in case you were able to see me. But you can, of course, as always, tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio. I wasn't joking. There was no chemical weapons attack on Douma. There was no nerve agent found in the samples analysed by the OPCW. You know the OPCW, the one that we crowed about when we browbeat and bludgeoned them into, temporarily at least, accepting our script on the Skripals in Salisbury. Well, if they're that, I don't know, what should I call them? Professional? Respectable? An organisation? Will no doubt be getting right behind their finding that Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and, of course, the United States of America launched a blizzard of cruise missiles on Syria. I mean a blizzard. I mean hundreds of expensive, ultra-expensive cruise missiles down on Syria to punish them for a chemical weapons attack, which it turns out was, as I said here at the time, entirely bogus, a fabrication, a fake. I told you so. And I told you, and I tell you again, as I did my colleague from whom I took over this microphone just a few minutes ago, if you believe the British government, the ones who told you about the nerve agent attack on Douma, if you believe them about Amesbury, if you believe them about the Skripals and Salisbury, well, I've got a bridge here in London that I could sell you going cheap. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. And I ran into possibly the only man in London who happened to have this microphone right before me who does believe it, though he doesn't have any evidence on which to base that belief, because nobody has any evidence on which to base that belief, as a very, very significant man told us in The Guardian this morning. A knight of the realm, no doubt, and I'll be returning to his piece of work later in the show. But I need to start with Novichok, the sequel. I need to start with Novichok 2. I need to start with the startling observation that two people lie in a bubble now in the very same Salisbury hospital that the Skripals were in, who have, according to the state, been poisoned by the same deadly military-grade nerve agent that failed to kill the Skripals. Let's pray, all of us, whatever our point of view, that it fails to kill them too. Who were they? Well, a mystery pair, at least one of them is. The gentleman was sentenced to a term of imprisonment just 2 years ago after being convicted of being a heroin dealer on the streets of Salisbury. He's unemployed. He's a drug addict. He goes to Boots the chemist every day in Salisbury and with a clean needle gives himself, under supervision, a dose of methadone, the substitute for heroin. He has no visible means of support. Indeed, we're told that he raids the bins, as we used to say back in Scotland, that he goes through skips. He picks up dog ends and smokes them. And therein lies a tale. Because the very same man is living in a £274,000 house, which he either bought, and one of his new Facebook friends is a mortgage broker, or he rents. But how he manages to first get a mortgage, second pay a mortgage, or third, in extremis, pay a rent as an unemployed, former drug-dealing drug addict is a very great mystery indeed. Anyway, in that 274,000 quote-unquote executive house, because that's what it was marketed as, he began to sweat profusely and then foam at the mouth and then begin to act like a zombie in front of his friend, a witness, who presumably touched him, but has not been affected by military-grade nerve agent. And of course, having been a witness to this extraordinary, horrific behaviour by the gentleman, he'll no doubt be able to help police with their inquiries. The man's girlfriend, many hours earlier, some 7, had been taken to hospital, herself having been taken ill. It is said that she is both a drug addict and an alcoholic and lives in a homeless hostel in which I can tell you, though you haven't read it anywhere else, that in March a 20-year-old man died a completely unexplained, inexplicable death. No cause of death has yet been established. So it's a rum current in the Salisbury-Amesbury undergrowth that we are talking about here. Question: why would anyone want to kill them? They were doing a good enough job trying to kill themselves with drink and drugs. Why would Russia try to kill them in the middle of the most successful World Cup in living memory? Why would Russia return to the scene of a crime and compound it with such an insane attempt at double murder of 2 completely unknown and unconnected people? Now, you may already be saying, no, they were, as my colleague that I took over this microphone from earlier said, no, they are collateral damage. Well, we'll come to that. Because the man who invented Novichok defected to the United States, published a book telling you how to make Novichok, including all of the chemical recipe for Novichok, which was being sold on Amazon right up until the day of the Skripal affair. He told us something yesterday very significant indeed. He said, no discarded Novichok from 4 months ago could possibly still be active because it degrades quickly on contact with water. We already knew that, if you think about it, because that's why we were hosing down everywhere in Salisbury, everywhere except wherever this unfortunate couple picked up this poison. We were hosing it down because it doesn't survive contact with water. So much so, according to the public health authorities and the police, you should arm yourselves in Salisbury with baby wipes. So it doesn't survive contact with baby wipes either. So the inventor of Novichok says this cannot possibly be the same Novichok that struck the Skripals. Well, that means it's a new batch of Novichok. The inventor, the defector to the United States, says he believes the Russians did indeed come back with more Novichok and attacked these two people to sow confusion in Britain. And again, if you believe that, well, you're very stupid indeed. If you believe that Russia did that in the middle of the World Cup, you are very stupid indeed. And I really do have a bridge that I can sell you. Now, what did they pick up, and where is it? Was it a syringe, as was widely reported in the last 24 hours? If it was, that begs even more questions. Because if the Skripals were attacked with a syringe, the entire narrative about Novichok gel being placed on their doorknob falls. Because you can't inject a gel through a syringe. And therefore our state's purchase of the Skripal house, in order, I presume, to knock it down rather than turn it into a museum, is null and void. Because if the attack was mounted by syringe, then Novichok was never anywhere near the Skripal house. They were not, therefore, affected from the doorknob, and there's no need to spend £1 million buying their house. Second, if the Skripals were attacked by a syringe, two people attacked by a syringe, that's up close and personal. That means you're right in their face, infecting them with a syringe. And if you're that up close and personal, that means the Skripals saw who did it. And if they saw who did it, given that they're now both alive and well, they must have told the police who they saw doing it. And there therefore must be an artist's impression of the suspect or suspects extant, except we haven't seen it and are not being shown it, and may therefore sit down for our breakfast tomorrow. Other breakfasts are available. Sitting next to someone with Novichok up their jumper in a syringe, ready to spray it on us. But then maybe it wasn't a syringe. Maybe it was a vial. Maybe it was a tub. So we're asked to believe this couple found a vial, a syringe, or a tub, took it home and got infected by it. Well, where is it? Because that will answer all the questions, won't it? At least will answer most of mine. But the best one, I thought, was the one that's currently leading the Daily Mail. They got infected off a dog end. They picked up a half-smoked cigarette in the street and lit up. And the cigarette was laced with Novichok. I wonder where the dead smoker of the original cigarette might be. Much more of this coming up, because this is the University of the Airwaves. It's the mother of all talk shows.
I should have known better with a girl like you, that I would love everything that you do, and I do. Hey, 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 and I do.
It's the anniversary of A Hard Day's Night. Wow. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. 50 years. We'll be playing the Beatles all night, partly because I'm in love with Liverpool, partly because I'm going there in September. Tickets are going like hotcakes for St. George's Hall, and partly because I love the Beatles. I also love my first guest in a manly sort of way. He's His Excellency Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, hero of the events that we covered last week when he emerged and was finally acknowledged to be the only man within the entire British state apparatus who tried to stop Jack Straw and co. profiting from torture. He joins me now to talk about Novichok too. Craig Murray, welcome.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
Now, I adumbrated the reasons, just the top 10 reasons why I caution everyone into at least skepticism of the state narrative of Novichok 2, as I did over Novichok 1. But you're the lead man. You're the man producing most of the best arguments. Tell us, give me your top 5 arguments why the story that the Russians returned, this time to Amesbury, to strike this hapless couple should not be believed.
Well, the first one is, of course, that there was never any evidence that the first attack was done by the Russian state or any Russians at all. And key to that is the fact that there's never been any evidence as to where the Novichok was produced. And Novichok is a class of nerve agents for which formulae have been published for decades now, and which have been made in several countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom. Furthermore, the incompetence of the entire thing is belief. Boris Johnson told us at the time of the first attack that they had information that there had been a 10-year program, a decade-long program of stockpiling in Novichok and of training people in its techniques for secret assassination. And Boris Johnson even said that he had got a manual, a copy of the Russian manual for secret Novichok assassination techniques, and that this manual said you should smear the Novichok on a doorknob. And now we are to believe that in a decade-long program of secret assassination techniques and stockpiling Novichok, the Russians are so incompetent that the Novichok doesn't actually kill people, despite allegedly being 10 times more potent than the X, according to the Prime Minister. And not only that, but these highly trained assassins left the Novichok lying around in a park to be discovered by any casual people, that they just left evidence lying about. And so the entire story is just an absolute nonsense from beginning to end. And what I find most interesting about it is that I just don't know anybody who believes it. I really don't. And if you look at all social media, and if you look at the comment sections, even at papers like the Mail and the Telegraph, you'll find the overwhelming majority of people are deeply, deeply sceptical of this completely nuts narrative that the government is trying to sell to us.
I'll tell you the standout for me in what you've just said. It strikes me that if the material was discarded in the park, that makes it more likely, and I've always thought it overwhelmingly likely, that they were attacked in the park and not on the doorknob. And therefore, because if they were attacked on the doorknob, they wouldn't have lasted 5 hours before slumping at exactly the same time, despite the differences in their age, physique, and state of health. It makes it much more likely that they were attacked at the park and that the material, if there was material cast away, was cast away at the park. On both of those counts, we've been led up the garden path, because if they were highly trained state assassins, products of a 10-year program, wielding ultra-expensive and rare materiel, they would not have attacked them in full view in the park, and they would not have thrown it away either.
Exactly. I mean, all of that is just not consistent with the story we're being painted. That, they say this is a military-grade, extremely pure weapon that could only be made by a state. and yet it's apparently administered by crass amateurs who can't do anything right at all. It just doesn't add up. But it's also, extremely difficult if it was administered to the Skripals in the park. It's very hard to see why they're not dead. It's very hard to understand what we're told about the potency of this Novichok, and the fact that everybody so far, and touch wood, I do pray the two people currently unwell do survive. Everybody so far has survived.
The inventor said that water disposes of Novichok, and that 4 months of normal rainfall would not have allowed the original batch of Novichok to survive. So he claims that the Russians must therefore have returned. We could agree that whoever did it may have returned, or there may be some other explanation that it would be unpleasant to speculate about whilst people are clinging to their lives. But his line is that Russia returned to the attack to sow confusion in the British state and its investigatory authorities. What do you say to that?
Yes, I've seen that argument put forward by Luke Harding of The Guardian as well in a tweet. I think, the idea that the benefits of sowing confusion to an investigation which already is going nowhere and is totally confused would outweigh the additional risk of being caught. Now, it's plainly a very strange calculation. I think that's extremely unlikely. The idea that the Russian state would come and target two totally unrelated people, I just don't buy that at all. But it is absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everybody remembers that at the time of the first attack, it wasn't just the chap who invented Novichok who said it rushes away in water. We had the chief medical officer saying that you should just wash your clothes and dust yourself down with wet wipes, and it's okay because it's destroyed by water.
Yes, and it won't damage your washing machine.
Exactly. And we had the fire brigade just hosing down places with water to get rid of it. And we had no end of professors wheeled out on TV to say that it's washed away by water and it degrades in sunlight. And now we have a new lot of professors and chemical weapons experts turning up on TV to say the opposite of what the last lot said. And it's as though the media are able to call upon experts to say whatever it is the government line wants to be stated at the time. And ordinary people are just sick of it. People have just completely lost belief in it.
Yes. Talking of the media, the Daily Mail is currently running as its main line that these people were affected by cigarette butts, which means that there's a smoker somewhere lying dead in Salisbury, because if there's if there's Novichok on the cigarette butts, there was Novichok on the original cigarette, and somebody smoked it before throwing it away. What do you make of grown men and women, educated men and women who earn their living from purveying news and analysis, actually publishing such tripe?
No, I mean, it plainly cannot be true. There's no way that, as you say, that a cigarette butt can be contaminated with Novichok without having killed a person who first smoked it. And on top of which, I've seen reports yesterday. In fact, the police were quoted yesterday as saying it was in a sealed container. And that, again, is very strange, because if it was in a sealed container, then it would be at full strength. And if these people opened the sealed container,
they'd be dead.
Accessed and touched the full strength Novichok straight out the container, they would be dead.
And where is the container?
Precisely. This is a good question. And I've also seen the idea that it was in a syringe, with the suggestion that these people are addicted to drugs and therefore he used a syringe which had Novichok on it. And again, a syringe is not the obvious way to apply Novichok to the doorknob, which is still the official story. And again, if you directly injected it, you would certainly be dead.
Well, you can't apply a gel to a doorknob through a syringe. It's too thick.
Yeah, no, it plainly wouldn't work.
You could spray somebody through a syringe, but the danger of infecting yourself would be extremely high, and you'd also have to be right up close and personal with your target in order to do it, which again means it happened in the park, not at the door that we've just paid £1 million for.
Yeah,
that's all being forgotten now.
Yeah. It's also extraordinary that nobody is mentioning Porton Down, and that Amesbury is 2.5 miles from Porton Down.
Well, that's the elephant in the room that I was about to turn to, Craig. So please make that point, because in any normal polity, the extraordinary proximity of our own Chemical and Biological Weapons Institute at Porton Down, 2 minutes drive away from Amesbury, would be right up at the top of the speculation list, certainly above a cigarette butt.
Yeah, you have one of the very few acknowledged sources of such chemicals in the world sitting there, and 6 miles one side of it, you've had an attack, and 2 miles the other side of it, you've had an attack. And nobody is mentioning it as a possible source of the chemical. Now, we all know, for example, that sadly there are instances of doctors and nurses who kill patients in hospitals using drugs for whatever reason of psychological disturbance that causes them to do it. It's not at all impossible that somebody within Porton Down has some kind of pathological hatred or disturbance and is using chemicals from there in order to attack people. And presumably around Salisbury, it's quite possible such people would have known of the Skripals, and they would be a target who would be useful for the purposes of deflection, in that a mad serial killer would not especially be suspected. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm not saying I know that's what it is, but it seems to me to be at least as probable as the idea that Vladimir Putin somehow decided to try to kill off this couple in Salisbury.
What about, finally, do you know anything about the male victim who turned ill, became extremely ill in his house? I've been looking into the house. It is a quote-unquote executive house. It was on sale for £274,000. He's an unemployed drug addict with no visible means of support beyond housing benefit, which wouldn't pay for a £274,000 house in Amesbury. Do you know anything about this man?
Not much more than that. It's quite interesting. How he came to possess that house is something I've wondered about. There seem to be lifestyle questions here that aren't compatible with the picture that's been painted. And also, I noticed on his Facebook account, he has very few likes. He's only liked, I think, 4 or 5 things, one of which is a mortgage broker. So it seems he was perhaps able to get a mortgage to buy this house, which was bought this year. It's a new buy. But how somebody who is reportedly unemployed and is a registered heroin addict manages to get a mortgage is yet another one of the very strange mysteries around this case.
This one will run and run, I think. Craig Murray, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.
Across the UK, online and
Another great Liverpool man, the great Elvis Costello. Playing that because I love him too. And because he's just announced that he's had to cancel his tour because he's facing an aggressive cancer at the age of 63. And every one of us should pray for his full and complete recovery. 0344 499 1000, that's the number to call. You can email via the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text TALK and then your message to 87222, although that will cost you 25 pence plus your normal charges. But you can tweet me free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Now, many of you have recalled the truly memorable interview that I had with Professor Dave COLLUM, Professor of Chemistry at the prestigious American University, Cornell. We've been lucky enough to get him back on now for Novichok 2. Professor COLLUM, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, George, thanks for inviting me.
Now, we spoke, and the landmark in the interview that we did before was that it was not true that only a state actor could have produced the Novichok family of nerve agents, that your students could, not just because they've got a brilliant teacher. You made the point that most students in most chemistry labs could do so. So, what were your first thoughts when you learned that just when we thought it was safe to get back into the water being the operative thing, it's back. Novichok 2 has re-emerged. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm playing a little catch-up because I was wandering around Europe actually fairly offline. But what struck me as odd is the motive for the people getting poisoned by the Novichok now was non-existent. And so what was it, a couple of heroin addicts who were found in an alley frothing at the mouth. And my first thought is, well, I think there are a lot of heroin addicts sitting in the alleys right now frothing at the mouth. So it seems like a more absurd story than the first one. And no one has offered an explanation as to why the Russians would want to kill a couple of heroin addicts in an alley. Maybe you can tell me.
What I can tell you is that there are grown men and women, highly educated, highly paid to bring us the news and analysis, who are doing exactly that as we speak. It's a funny old world, that's for sure. Let me ask you some, as it were, professional questions, certainly questions that are beyond my ken. It was stated from the beginning that water and direct sunlight destroyed Novichok. So much so we were hosing down everywhere that might have been affected by it. And moreover, that it could be tackled with a simple baby wipe. There was a run on baby wipes in all the chemist shops in Salisbury, sold out completely. We were told that you should wash your mobile phone with a baby wipe. You should put your clothes in the washing machine. It will not damage your washing machine because the water destroys it. So how could Novichok, discarded after the first attack, have survived 4 months in the blinding sunlight and periodic heavy rain in Salisbury?
I don't think it would, right? I have heard the claims that it's the leftover material that was exposed to the elements from the last time, and the Novichok has to have some resistance to water because you'd never be able to get it inside the human body. Somehow got to get to the synapses of the nerves, and before getting destroyed. So it can't instantaneously hydrolyze by water, but also if it's not reactive enough to hydrolyze by water, it's not reactive enough to do any chemistry either. And so it's a balancing act, and so it is a presumably somewhat slowly hydrolyzing material. Some of them that are sort of crudely speaking in this class, actually can be dissolved in water, and presumably they don't last for very long, but they can be dissolved in water. Lasting for months in Britain, you guys have wet weather, so I would think that that's a silly story. I don't know why it would be from the previous batch. Who has connected it to the previous batch? That's a complete mystery to me. I think they're trying to connect it to the previous perpetrators, which they believe they've made the case was, Putin and et al. But I don't think they made that case either. So this is a political commentary, though. So by the way, since our last chat, I did an experiment, and on the final exam of my second semester graduate level organic course, I gave them the structure of a Novichok that supposedly killed a banker in 1995. And I said, design a synthesis of this, and every single kid in the course got full credit. It's that easy. So to get back to that point that anyone could make them, it's not only 3 steps, but you can mix the ingredients and various combinations of order too. So anyone could make a Novichok. You can buy the chemicals from a standard supply house. They're all available, at least for this 95 version. And so no one should be able to claim that it's a uniquely Russian technology, which was the pitch they gave us last time. And this time I think they're backing off that idea a little bit, maybe. I don't know.
Well, that's a statement so profound, although it's banal to you. It's extremely profound here in Britain, because we have spent 4 months being force-fed the narrative that this was such a complex weapon that only a state could have produced it, and a state with a motive for using it against the Skripals was the pointer to the involvement of the Russian state. Now that you, an eminent professor, have stated that every kid in your course was able to produce the Novichok,
well,
this
design
kills.
synthesis, I got to be careful. We didn't make it, because that would be reckless, but we designed syntheses, yeah. Yeah, it's easy to make. It's got to be easy to make. It's trivial, actually.
That's a devastating point, you see, and that's why I'm accentuating it. It's devastating because...
No, I know, because it makes it either Russia did it or anyone in the world who wants it to look like Russia did it, and that's presumably every other sovereign state in the world. So I can guarantee you there are chemists in Nigeria who are good enough to make this, right? This is not some high-tech. They call it military-grade nerve agent. I have no idea what they mean by military-grade, as opposed to what, the stuff you buy at Walmart? I mean, what makes it military-grade? It's toxic, of course. But, by the way, if you look at the structure of the Novichoks, you put them side by side with the weed killer Roundup, you'd see a remarkable similarity. So they're easy molecules.
This is very significant. I want to ask you a banal question from me. We were told, indeed the entire British narrative is based upon the existence of a manual telling Russian agents that they should smear Novichok in a gel form on a doorknob, and that's what happened. So much so we've now bought the doorknob and the accompanying house for £1 million, 3 times its value. As a state, we bought it, presumably to knock it down. Now, if the existence of a syringe in the very park where the 2 Skripals were found slumped is established, the narrative that it was smeared in a gel form on the doorknob in alignment with a manual which Boris Johnson had in his possession, he said, collapses. So I want to ask you, can you smear gel through a syringe?
Yeah, you can. If you buy crazy glue at the store, you can buy it in syringes. So it depends. I don't think they're terribly viscous. You couldn't send it to a very fine gauge needle, maybe, but yeah, you could do it through a syringe. But that doesn't tell you who did it. It gets back to the political question. They keep trying to make it sound like it's Russia, and for all I know, it is Russia. I'm just saying that what these guys are saying makes no sense to me. The deductive reasoning side of my brain says you cannot conclude it's Russian. That would be like someone found a Russian note next to the guy. Say, oh, no one would ever do that. Well, of course they would if they wanted to make it look like Russians did it. Right? So this is just easy stuff. And so I'm not even convinced that they found any Novichok. How do you even know that? They told us, oh, I feel much better now, right? They told us. It must be true, right? So at this point, you should question everything they tell us. I just don't believe it anymore.
I was talking earlier to former Ambassador Craig Murray about the elephant in the room. Amesbury is 2 minutes drive from Porton Down. Salisbury is 6 minutes drive from Porton Down. You've had in your country examples of people sending out white powder in envelopes to Congress people and so on, who turned out to be insiders inside various institutions in the United States with access to this kind of material. It's surely at least as plausible a hypothesis that somebody in or connected to somebody inside Porton Down has developed some maniacal, pathological hatred and wishes to harm other people. That's at least as plausible as what our biggest newspaper is currently running this minute as the lead story on its website, that these two people were killed from a discarded or badly attacked, wounded, clinging to their lives, having picked up discarded cigarette butts, leaving aside, of course, that there must be a dead smoker of the original cigarette lying somewhere in the undergrowth. What about the Porton Down connection?
Yeah. So now you can flip the argument. Now you can say, oh, maybe the Russians put all these poisons right around Porton Down to make them look like they did, but this shows you the absurdity of the claim. So if they, for example, poison these guys demonstrably with something like plutonium, you go, okay, now we've narrowed the candidates down.
Because that's nuclear state derived.
Right. And so you can rule out a number of sovereign states that don't have it or wouldn't easily get it, but this stuff's so easy to get. It would be like a cyanide poisoning and then saying, oh, yeah, but it's Russian-grade cyanide. Well, it's still just cyanide. And so that's the problem. And if they keep just pretending like because it's a Novichok and it was created in Russia 30 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever the magic number is, it in no way, shape, or form connects them to the Russians. And since they're not coming up with better stories, I've got to assume that their model is to claim there was a poisoning. I give that a finite chance of being true, and then claim that it must be the Russians. There's no way that's true unless they've got something they're not telling us, which means they're lying. And so they've already proved they're willing to lie to us. And if they're telling us everything they know, then it's just stupid.
Just
and
stupid.
Stupid.
Just stupid is probably the note we should end on, Professor. You certainly could never be so described. I'm afraid quite a lot of the people who are talking from powerful positions in Britain could easily be so described. Professor Dave COLLUM from New York, from Cornell University, Professor of Chemistry. I do hope what he has just said travels widely, but I have my doubts. Well, let's go for a break and then to the news, yeah? David Dom will be reading the news, and I'll be back right after that. Now, you can email me, as James Webster has, ranting Galloway, the Russian apologist, at it again. Another 3 hours of blaming everyone apart from Russia. Galloway is slowly turning into an alt-right Alex Jones light clone with his ridiculous conspiracy theories. Deep state, George Soros, I'm not a liberal, rants every week. Galloway, you're a wee man with a big mouth. So we now know he's Scottish. And nobody is listening anymore. Rant away, as you're a political has-been. Nobody cares anymore. Except you, James Webster, who are not only listening, but writing to me. Does your wife know of your strange obsession? John Guess says Novichok, which Porton didn't have, was stolen as it didn't exist. It couldn't be stolen, so it never happened. Russia kindly offered us some of theirs via Miss Skripal, but she dropped it in a park in Amesbury. It spilled, and the rest is history. Well, that's as plausible as everything else that we've heard. George says, after a long week, there's only one tonic. Bottle of vino, Brazil versus Belgium on mute, and George Galloway Talk Radio on the airwaves. Thanks, George. It's going great. You do know that I picked Belgium at 11-1, don't you? Think for yourself says, I'm Team Galloway. It wasn't the Russians what did it, Dan. That's to Dan Wooten, who was on before me. Surprised you haven't got a gig on Global LBC. Lucy Diamond says, hi, George. Great to have you back. It's been a long week. We really needed a breath of fresh air. Rock on, comrade. And Tony Malley from Stirling says, based on your own instinct, George, do you think these Novichok stories are part of a long-game attempt to discredit Russia, or simply a short-term tactic to distract people from the government's failings? I'll be absolutely honest with you, Tony. I really don't know what happened to the Skripals and what happened to this latest pair. I really don't. And as I said in my column on Russia Today on the website this week, the best, most plausible theory that I have heard came from Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist, who, on television in Britain in the last few days, said that he believed it was connected to Russian criminal gangs, to the Russian mafia, and that Skripal had been reactivated by the British to help them crack down on Russian criminal activity in the United Kingdom, particularly in London. That's, if I was forced to plump for a theory, that would be the one I would plump for. Not the Russian state, but Russian criminals. But this latest event obviously sends us all down several new rabbit holes, whether by intention, design, or accident. Who knows? I generally lean, having been in politics for a very long time, towards the cock-up theory rather than the conspiracy theory of events. And we'll have to see what emerges. But of two things I'm absolutely certain. The first is that the least to gain from all of this affair has been the Russian state. And therefore, on the principle of cui bono, who benefits, it seems to me that they are at the bottom of the list of suspects, not at the top. But the second thing is of more importance for me. Although I've spent a lifetime feeling it, I can no longer avoid stating my absolute, wholehearted feeling that the British media is utterly corrupt to its core. They're not stupid. They're all far better educated than me. But none of the questions that I have asked this evening and over the last day or two on social media, none of the questions that the Honourable Craig Murray has been raising, including tonight on this show, none of the intelligence that we just heard from the professor of chemistry at Cornell University, one of the world's greatest universities. None of these questions, none of that intelligence has been aired in the British media. Now, that's no accident. It cannot be an accident. It cannot be an accident that the OPCW report on Duma, that there was no chemical weapons attack on Duma, there was no nerve agent present in any of the samples that they took from Duma. It cannot be an accident that that news is being suppressed. It's being suppressed because the entire media blew their trumpets with the cruise missiles raining down on Syria on an entirely bogus, false prospect. Now, what can you do in a country that is supposedly a democracy but has an utterly corrupt media which lies and which covers up uncomfortable truths for the powerful and the rich and powerful. What can you do? Well, all you can do is try to make your own platforms, your own media. Try to make use of a platform like this that I am given every Friday night. Indeed, I'll be back on Monday morning at 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Just for one day, but it's a stand-in, it's a platform. We must use all our efforts to construct an alternative media, because the current media that we have is a part of the problem. Think for yourself says, yes, George, bells are ringing. Novichok, Blair, WMD. And Stuart on the email says, good evening, George. Isn't it strange that the latest chemical attack, if it really is that, just by coincidence, has happened when Russia has held its the most successful World Cup ever, and more importantly, the meeting between Trump and Putin next week. I smell a rat, a dirty big rat. Do you, Stuart? I can smell it from here. Peter in Glasgow says, if the Spanish Armada was sighted at Dover, I'd be the first to go to the English defence. But the reason we support anyone but them is they ram it down your throat that they won the World Cup in black and white, and mention it more than winning the war. Okay, Peter, we'll come on to that in the final hour. Paul says, good evening, George. If you have dressed up tonight because people can see you, why are you not wearing a waistcoat? Because Southgate does, and so did Top Cap. You missed a trick here, George. Love and peace. Paul, I'm almost always in a waistcoat, but it's 37 degrees here. That's over 100 in real money. Hassan tells me that Fellaini put Belgium up 1-0. I do say that me and Mrs. Rojo, the Salford Mank, are two of very few of those who've stood by Fellaini all the way. And as I told you, if I was a betting man, I picked Belgium to win the World Cup at 11-1. Jane A. says, oh, how Mr. Putin and the rest of the world must be laughing. Lubna says, listening to teacher. George Galloway on Talk Radio. Please join us. Thanks, Lubna. Abbott Mental says, Novichok Part 2. The infected person is a junkie. That cannot be a good mix with methadone. You could not make this up. Tony says, George, I have no truck with Putin and his government, but these strange chemical attacks in Salisbury just don't add up in my book. I reckon that deep state dirty tricks are at hand here to smear Putin and his government for reasons I just can't quite work out. Just very strange, says Tony in Leeds. I'm not even persuaded of that. It's all such a comedy of errors and contradictions. I like to think that if the state had done it, they'd have done a better job of it. They would have killed the people for a start. The Communicipalist says, as there's no video evidence of so-called white helmets fabricating false flag chemical non-attacks in Syria, how do I know similar actors aren't being used in Wiltshire for propaganda purposes? The first victim of post-truth politics is the status quo. And a texter, Mark in Lowestoft, says nearly 2 months ago, Trump cancelled all funding with immediate effect to the white helmet actors, $50 million, after he was shown the Russians turning up in The Hague, Netherlands, with the children supposedly gassed in Duma, including the young boy who we were shown being hosed down with water. He was alive and well, testifying that it was faked. With that amount of funding, they could have got Spielberg to direct it, rather than the farce we were shown. I feel really sorry for poor old Sergei Lavrov in all this, the personification of dignity and diplomacy, who has to deal with all these numpties thrown at him, from the wretched Hillary Clinton to the chinless paper tiger Phil Hammond to bungling bozo, none of them fit enough to carry Lavrov's briefcase. Best show on the airwaves, Gigi. All the best. Mark in Lowestoft. Thank you, Mark. And Bob Justice says, it's doubtful Russia is involved in Wiltshire's heroin trade. There's a big problem. Whatever the mainstream peddle about drug users, remember US soldiers guarding opium crops in Afghanistan, if there's contaminated drugs, the authorities have a duty of care. And David Leviscont says, is there a bad apple in the Porton Down facility. Funny how both incidents are so close to a facility that does make Novichok. And Terry Eaton says the Russians can't be blamed for everything. Surely now this latest debacle brings the whole Skripal affair into disrepute. The MSM should be over this like a rash. But will they? I'm afraid they definitely will not. And Tad says, George, I have some good advice for all your listeners. If the official line says it's raining outside, go and check for yourselves. I have seen and witnessed so much unsubstantiated BS emanating from the government and its agencies in my 60 years. I never trust them at all, ever. People who do are either extremely gullible or just useful idiots. But that is precisely what the officers of the state depend upon. Educate yourselves, people, before it's too late. And think for yourself, says, just how much contempt must the government, all governments, have for citizens if they expect us to believe it's the Russians what did it? Vile and predictable. It's worth making the point, think for yourself, that we're not citizens, something I reminded myself of earlier this week when I was listening to the French national anthem, calling on its citizens to arm themselves and advance. Citizen, great word, citizen, capital C, citizen. We, on the other hand, are subjects. Fra says another false flag distraction by the government. What are they really up to? Russophobia and a distraction from the debacle that is Brexit? Are more sanctions on the way? Well, I've no doubt that more sanctions are possible. I doubt if it's a distraction from the debacle that is Brexit. That's an elephant that's too big in the room, and we'll be talking to Dan Hodges shortly about it because, of course, the cabinet are all locked up. Hooray! No, only in Chequers. But if they resign, they've got to walk to the end of the drive to get a minicab. David Leviscont says our media has become an echo chamber of the government. Just accept and question nothing. More than that, David, they are an echo chamber. They are an amplifier for not the government, but the state. Oh my, really, says George. Wow, what an opening to the show. You never disappoint. Brilliant. Thank you for that, my friend. Tony X, the protest board, says anyone with an inquisitive mind might start looking for a connection between the Skripals and this heroin dealer, knowing that fentanyl, which was mentioned early in the Skripal affair, has these overdose symptoms. And his link is on his Twitter feed. One more, then we'll take a break. John says, poison story on the front page of the Daily Mail, while the DWP minister misleads MPs on the effects of universal credit, not on main headline coverage. Let's take a break for some of the necessary capitalist messages.
Talk Radio. Talk and entertainment across the nation.
Talk Radio. Day is night, I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright.
Don't start me talking, as Elvis Costello would say, because I could talk all night. Thanks to Tony X for reminding me of that one. I'm going to talk until 10 o'clock, but I'm also going to listen. And Dan Hodges, the wizard commentator for the Mail on Sunday, very prominent in public affairs these days, is a man with his ear very close to the door of Chequers. He's not there, but he knows the runners and riders. He knows who might be looking for a taxi at the end of the night. So who better to turn to than Dan of the Mail on Sunday. Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you won't have heard anything because they've taken all their mobile phones and smart watches. Who knew that we had cabinet members who were down with the kids enough to have smart watches? But there's nothing coming out of Chequers, or is there?
Well, there's nothing coming out of Chequers. I mean, certainly, however, I think before they went in, there was a sense, despite some of the fire and fury in this morning's papers, that despite all that, it looked like Theresa May was actually more or less going to get her way. I mean, certainly, speaking to friends of some of the more prominent cabinet ministers who had been touted for possible resignations, there was a sense that they were going to, I think the way it was put to me was they were going to, stick with it and fight their corner, which is obviously a very convenient way of saying, they were going to stick with their ministerial.
Well, exactly, their ministerial Montego, yes.
And their briefs, especially given that they'd been told that if they didn't stick with their ministerial cars, they would be taken off them and they would be, hitching home. So, obviously we'll have to wait and see. We're getting a statement at 9, or rather a statement's been put out under embargo till 9, and that's when the fun will begin. But the word at the moment is that if nothing else, she's kept the cabinet intact for now.
Well, we'll talk in a minute what basis that intacto might take. But what did you make of the return of David Cameron to the fray, to the consternation, no doubt, of Danny Dyer? He had a meeting with Boris Johnson, with whom he was never particularly close, to talk Boris down off the tree.
Yeah, again, speaking to friends of David Cameron, there was certainly a lot of bemusement, I think, at how the meeting had been spun by, obviously, we will never know who spun it or for what reasons. But, firstly, the meeting had been in the diary for some time and was primarily meant to be a discussion about China and other issues. And whilst Brexit did come up, it wasn't, as it were, the purpose of the meeting. Friends of Cameron just don't recognise the description of the meeting, in particular the suggestion that Cameron agreed that they were currently facing the worst of all worlds. That's, he is somebody who is very strongly believes that the cabinet are going to have to sign up to the compromise that Theresa May's been seeking. And also there was, to put it bluntly, incredulity at the suggestion that was being floated by some that Boris had told David Cameron that he had to start to portray himself as the father of Brexit.
Yes.
But that was something that David Cameron agreed to do, because David Cameron's been made very clear from the beginning that he doesn't support Brexit and thinks Brexit is going to be a mistake, and indeed that is why he resigned. So, as I said, there is some bemusement within Camp Cameron about how that sort of seeming summit between the two men was portrayed.
Now, what is the Theresa May plan that may emerge intact and that David Cameron didn't describe as the worst of all possible worlds?
Well, the way it's been represented to me is it's effectively Mansion House plus. So obviously, we had the speech from at Mansion House. We've had a couple of iterations of that since then in places like Florence. But that is basically what Downing Street are saying she's presenting. Their pitch is she is actually, despite the narrative we've seen about this, she's been consistent from the beginning in terms of what her stance has been. There will be no formal membership of the customs union. Britain must have the ability to strike trade deals. There will be no formal, role for the European courts. But equally within that, that she recognises that to get a deal through and to avoid a no-deal scenario, which I think everybody agrees would be an absolute disaster, there are going to have to be some compromises made, particularly in the area of trade and this rather sort of narrow point about what is called harmonisation. Whether we sign up on trade to the same sort of basic sort of conditions, workplace conditions, environmental protection that the rest of Europe recognises. And at the moment, the feeling is that she is prepared to give concessions for that in order to get a what I think they would call a sort of a pragmatic Brexit.
Well, as you describe it, and as I've read it described elsewhere, the most salient point for me is that the European Union negotiators are unlikely to accept that.
Well, that is a very interesting point. Sort of lost in all the excitement about about the meetings at the Foreign Office and meetings with Cameron. A significant meeting was that obviously yesterday Theresa May went off to sit down with Angela Merkel and spell out to Angela Merkel what her plans were. Now, we haven't had any feedback yet in terms of what Angela Merkel's response for that. But as I said, it does seem that Theresa May has decided to make concessions on this issue of harmonisation, and accepted from a European perspective that if we are going to have access to some form of trade with the European Union, we can't expect them to be in a position where we can then undercut them in terms of terms and conditions and environment, etc. So it does seem strange that Theresa May would grant those concessions to Angela Merkel if she didn't feel that there would be some sort of positive response. So we'll have to see. I mean, obviously, as we've seen, Mrs. Merkel has her own problems. The European bloc has its own significant problems anyway, particularly in relation to the issue of immigration. So the question is, are they going to want to sort of spend the time digging in on this issue with us, or are they prepared to actually adopt a more pragmatic stance themselves? That's something we're just going to have to wait and see.
Well, neither of us are gambling men, but would your money therefore be on an intact cabinet going home in their own cars this evening, and the EU accepting the paper that would have passed the British cabinet?
I certainly think we will see an intact cabinet. I don't think we will get an automatic acceptance from the EU of what the cabinet has agreed. Obviously, in a sense, rather belatedly, this is almost the start of the negotiations, because this is the first time we will have had a sort of a detailed and concerted British government position. And I think that is going to be, the issue as we move forward. To what extent does Theresa May have the scope to make additional concessions, and to what extent do the European Union accept that she is, entering into these negotiations in good faith, and that they have to respond in kind. Obviously, we've all talked about the nightmare scenario of a no-deal Brexit. Up until now, it has been perceived that is almost, a desire of the hardcore Eurosceptics who want an ideologically pure Brexit. But I think it would certainly be problematic, to put it mildly, if we now got into a situation where it was the European Union that seemed to be driving us towards a no-deal Brexit. That would be problematic for Theresa May and problematic for all of us.
Dan Hodges, that's been really helpful. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Dan Hodges of The Mail on Sunday.
Across the UK, online and on DAB, The Independent Republic.
The Fab Four. Coutinho, Firmino, Salah, etc. The Fab Four, Liverpool. We're thinking Liverpool tonight. I'll be there on the 8th of September if you want to come and see me and Ken Livingstone in The Outsiders. Arena Vanat says the purchase of the Executive House and whether it was bought for cash can be checked with the Land Registry online. All info is available. That said, it's not an easy website to use, but a private company can do it in a flash. Well, I'm sure that Craig Murray is searching that almost as we speak. If anyone else wants to beat him to it, they're welcome. The Communicationalist says Novichok Gate made the legitimation crisis the government was already facing go terminal, I think. The public disconnect from a duplicitous regime, increasingly ensnared in absurdities of its own making, is becoming the zeitgeist of austerity Britain. Very well written. Fra says, so what's the official reaction from Salisbury Hospital? Well, I know that the brother of one of the victims was being blanked when he was trying to get information, but I did hear him on the radio very recently, in the last couple of hours, say that the police were going to let him in to see his brother, though the visit wouldn't be up to much because the brother's in a bubble, as he said. The Skripal affair was a fentanyl problem for a few days before it became Novichok, reminds Tony X, the protest board. And Dr. Fath URS says, George, has anyone considered Novichok 1 and 2 could be a new concept in international espionage and warfare. Weapons that don't actually kill, they just make you poorly. Bullets that bruise, rubber bayonets, and atomic bombs that hurt your eyes a little. And Russell says, incredulous, none of what you've said have I heard from any other stations. I didn't believe the first attack. This second is akin to the suicide of Dr. David Kelly. Weapons grade means it has to act as fast as a bullet. The heat is affecting the government and it's conning the media. The heat is affecting the government and it's conning media are flat out lying. And Keith says canines have a fantastic sense of smell. So does this stuff give off odour, however old? Well, we need to know what this receptacle was, wouldn't we? We need to know whether it was a cigarette butt, whether it was a syringe, whether it was a vial, whether it was a tub, all of which have been mentioned. What has not been mentioned is where this cigarette, this syringe, this vial, this tub is now. Do we have it? And if not, why not? Are we asked to believe that they found this, were contaminated by it, didn't know, left it lying there where they found it, in which case, presumably, somebody else has found it by now, either the police or someone else. Let's talk to Peter in Coatbridge. Peter, welcome.
Welcome, George. I was glad to talk to you. So I want to apologise for believing the British media about the amount of England fans that were coming back in body bags. I believed them. I really did. It was well done.
And
well
you have to laugh because they're now complaining that there are so few people there to support England. The same media that spent the last 6 months frightening the life out of every England fan and stopping them going.
Yes. Well, I've got just a quick quotation from a guy called Humbert Wolff, 1885, 1940.
Okay.
I'll give it to you. You cannot hope to bribe or twist, thank God, the British journalist. But seeing what the man will do unbribed, there is no occasion to.
Exactly. I often use that myself, but I didn't know it was Humbert Wolff. I always thought it was Lord Acton.
No, it's Humbert Wolff, I do believe.
Yeah, he must have picked it up from him. Humbert Wolff. I'll look that one up. Peter, thanks for that. And it's always right to apologise if you've been fooled. But you know the old saw, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Simon T. James says, scary times when we all know the government is telling lies and yet the MSM isn't interested. That's a very good way of putting it, Simon. Scary times. I feel myself more than discomforted by the now unassailable truth that we have a corrupted mainstream media that is ready to suppress the truth and accentuate the lies of government and the state. It's quite a scary thing. Helen says, George, I'm afraid I just can't suspend my disbelief at this latest Hollywood-esque government blockbuster. There are more holes in the story than a colander. Since April 4th, 4 people haven't died of a military-grade chemical weapon that has been the headline-grabbing news story on TV. 9 people actually die from listeria found in frozen vegetables, and there's not been a dicky bird about it. Comes to something when frozen sweet corn does a better job than Russian spies. Ridiculous. Helen, that's a very powerful point. I had no idea about this Listerine. Must look further into that. The communicipalist says, I'm trying to visualize someone in a pair of marigolds with a spatula smearing deadly nerve agent gel on a doorknob of a housing estate as the postman comes whistling up the path. But somehow I can't. You may recall that I have never believed this doorknob story. I've never believed it. I never believed that that would be an efficient way of using an extremely expensive and rare military-grade nerve agent, and it's far too prone to misadventure. It could have been touched and therefore could have killed, or not killed, as it turned out, anybody from the postman to a neighbour. It could have been touched by Yulia, for example. It's never me that shuts our front door. It's always my wife who always touches the front door and turns the key in the lock. Double lock, guys. And, therefore anyone trying to kill me would be pointless putting it on the doorknob, because it wouldn't be me that would be touching it. And they had no way of knowing that Skripal would have touched it. Secondly, it was pouring with rain that day. And rain, as we know, water, as we know, baby wipes, as we know, negate the effect of Novichok. It would have dripped. It would have fallen onto the ground. It would have affected the police officers who stood outside the door, day after day after day, all day and all night, until they decided that that's how it had been administered, when they were telling us that Yulia had brought it in her suitcase, brought it in flowers to put on our mother's grave, when they were telling us it was coming through the air vent in the Skripal's car, when they were telling us that it was administered in any number of ways. I never believed the doorknob. That's why I was so agitated about us buying the house for £1 million, presumably to knock it down, and any evidence that might still be in it. I've always believed that the Skripals were attacked in the park, or seconds before they came to the park. The seconds that it took them to walk from the only known CCTV images. By the way, in parenthesis, how come we've got such brilliant CCTV from off-licenses in Salisbury of the woman victim here buying our cans of beer and buying bottles of vodka, but we don't have any CCTV image from anywhere else in Salisbury? But we did have one glimpse of the Skripals walking normally after their heavy lunch in the Zizi's restaurant. Sorry, Zizi's. Bet you wish you'd been compulsively purchased. I saw that CCTV, and I believe they were walking entirely normally. And I calculated that it would have taken of the order of 45 seconds to walk from that CCTV point to the park bench where they were found. So I have always believed that they were attacked either on the bench or in that 45 seconds. Perhaps by someone they knew. Perhaps by someone who was with them. Maybe someone who was with them in the restaurant. But certainly someone who knew them. That would be consistent with spraying Novichok on them from a syringe. That would be consistent with a syringe being found in the bushes nearby, wouldn't it? That's a far more plausible story than the one we have been encouraged, indeed almost mandated, to believe as the official narrative in the story. I've always believed that these two people were targeted for reasons other than reasons of state. And I've given my explanation for that so many times, and they can be found on the website, on YouTube, in the many, many speeches and perorations that I have made on this subject on here. Tony says, on an entirely unrelated note, do you think England winning the World Cup would bring the country back together and dismiss this silly, childish Russophobia, if only for a short time? Good point. Let's see in the final hour what people have to say about that. Sarah says, we have the footy on mute to listen to talk radio too. Isn't that wonderful? I used to cause marital problems in households because people never took their wives out because they wanted to stay in and listen to the radio. And one of them is in this room with me now. I used to cause all kinds of problems because one partner wanted to, cuddle up Friday night and all that. These things happen. But the other partner wanted to listen to me until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I've got one of these in the room with me now. And now I've got people watching Brazil versus Belgium. Mute so they can listen to this show. Darren Alevi says, I wonder, George, what will Novichok episode 3 be? Larry, number 10 Downing Street's cat, to be the next victim? Maybe. Lol. Larry isn't expensive enough, Darren. You have to be a luxury Persian cat. Jack Frost says, doesn't it rain in Salisbury, George? If so, might inquire about the Scripples house if it becomes social housing. And Tony X says, you have to consider Occam's razor. OCCAM apostrophe S razor. R-A-Z-O-R. Now, Tony, when you mentioned Occam's razor yesterday, I must confess, I didn't know what you meant, but I do now. Tony says you have to consider Occam's razor when thinking about the Wiltshire affairs before thinking it's a government plot. This lot couldn't plot the skin off a rice pudding. I'm a scientist with a first-class biochemistry degree, says Tony X, the protest board, and both are not Novichok. Well, Tony, I'm predisposed to believing you, but now that I know you've got a first-class biochemistry degree and you've got the Occam's razor in your hand, it's even more persuasive.
Now it's up to you to let...
I'm so happy when you dance with me.
I might have a dance up in Liverpool, actually, September 8th. After the St George's Hall gig, I might look for a place where older people can dance. Must be somewhere in Liverpool. People from the Beatles generation. Maybe my old friend Audrey will find me somewhere. Now, Mohammed is in Maidenhead. Wants to talk about the World Cup. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Good evening, George. You're missing the match. It's obviously for good reason you're missing the match.
Yeah, but don't worry. I'm watching it whilst talking and working.
Fantastic, George. What do you think of the result so far?
Well, I picked Belgium when they were 11-1 in the betting, and it looks like they're hanging on a bit, but there's only a minute or two to go.
Not the first time for you to get something right, George, eh?
No, I'm astoundingly good at predictions, and the pools people are very lucky I don't gamble.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, George, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to say a quick piece about Talk Radio, then the World Cup shortly after. It'll take approximately about a minute. Is that okay?
Yes, of course, mate.
Okay, I'll go for it now. Cheers. So this is about Talk Radio, mother of all talk shows to the listeners. It might be recorded and they don't reset, but you should listen live or you might regret. Before sunset, you probably felt upset. Working 9 to 5 to prevent the debt. From 7 to 10, you can forget the sweat. Friday again, nighttime cassette. Talking with the legend, it's Mr. Double G. Careful what you say or in trouble you will be. Who can you trust when intentions get greedier? It's the last free space in the mainstream media. People tuning in almost every nation to this location for the full duration. Yeah, mother of all talk shows on the radio station. Call it education. Thank you, Denny Morris. Appreciation. Thanks, Mr. G, Denny Morris and the team for making this dream. Yeah, and now for the World Cup. So I'm just a bit nervous.
That's very good. No, really good, Mohammed. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's fabulous that people are writing music and writing lyrics and coming on the radio. It's like old times. It's like the Talk Sport days.
George?
Yes, go ahead, brother.
Oh, I'm still on the line. Oh, great.
Yes.
Now for the World Cup.
Yes. Yes, been wonderful, hasn't it?
Rashford and Lingard play at United. Lift up their skills, you will be delighted. Dyer, Kane, play at Spurs. Remember their names, not amateurs. Colombia win. We're in the last 8. We have Southgate as manager. Looking at the calendar. Saturday, Sweden. Getting out the camera. We've got stamina and we've got tricks. World Cup winners in the year 6 hits. The year 18 and we're all waiting. No matter what happens, we're all rating. The England team are amazing.
Excellent. And are you predicting them for the Cup, Mohammed?
Yeah, well, I hope so, George, but
I mean, it looks, in a moment or two, it looks like Brazil will be out. Hope I'm not tempting fate, but Belgium are pressing, ending the game in the opponent's half. And that leaves, only France, really, who look like favourites, and Belgium second favourites, I would have said.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, George, I think people forget that, I mean, obviously, England play well as a team. There's not any star players. We don't have Messi. We don't have Neymar. We don't have Cristiano Ronaldo. We don't have, but we've got a few players which are really decent. I mean, we've got two Manchester United players, as far as I know, Lingard and Rashford, and we've also got Spurs players, Kane and Dyer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have actually got...
And Danny Rose.
And Danny Rose, yeah. And the goalkeeper's fantastic as well. So I really hope we do win it. But, like, I don't know, George, it's a difficult one to predict, isn't it? What do you reckon?
Well, I think they've done really well. They've been quite lucky in the draw that they've had. And that's nothing to do with them. And you can only face what's in front of you. But considering they only squeezed through against Tunisia in the second minute of injury time, they beat a pub team called Panama, and they lost to Belgium. But they did well to beat Colombia. Colombia were no mugs, although they played a game which astounded me. If they'd played properly, they might actually have been able to win it. But they decided on different tactics.
But they didn't bring...
And England are quite lucky that they're up against Sweden tomorrow. So there's every possibility of England in the semi-final. And once you're in the semi-final, anything can happen.
Yeah, I completely agree, George. Obviously, if our luck's already been there, so maybe the luck will continue and get past Sweden and then...
Well, I think it's good, It's it potentially brings people together. Certainly in England, we'll be discussing its impact in Scotland later. It cheers people up, gives them something to be happy about in these difficult times. And how can I not wish the team well? I watch these players every week. Some of them play for my team. They are people that I admire, young people from working class communities, from all races. My neighbours are English. My workmates are English. England's been good to me. I've earned my living here. And I've always felt welcome here. What kind of churl would I be to wish them defeat against whomsoever? By the way, Belgium have just won, and Belgium are through and Brazil are out. Not something many people expected to say. Mohammed, thanks for your time and your effort. Your artistic efforts are greatly appreciated. Humpty Dumpty says it's an equal opportunities nerve agent. This is a response to the point that I made, only half jokingly. This is a military-grade nerve agent that only attacks people 2 by 2, not more, not less. Only attacks men and women. Doesn't attack 2 men, doesn't attack 2 women, and don't get me started on trans issues. And someone says, Humpty Dumpty says, it's an equal opportunities nerve agent. And Katie Judge says, great show, George. You have a unique way of saying what you mean. Always a pleasure to listen to you. A voice for the voiceless. Thank you, Katie. I see us in your avatar. Look forward to seeing you in Liverpool. And Linda says, talk. Evening, Gigi. True listening at last. On the latest poisoning, I first thought they're embarrassing themselves again. Big up for the important visitor next week, Trump. Second thought, most probably someone taken bad drugs. Thanks for your show, George. World Cup, Russia versus France final. Trust checkers locked in bread and water till they regain their senses. And Sean says, it's like the election of a new pope. When the Tories get a policy, white smoke will rise over checkers. Hedy says, the poor South American footballers don't seem to be able to deal with the much heavier gravity in Russia. Many of them fall over for no reason and spend a lot of time on the ground. Or maybe they're putting it on. Well, I did see that Neymar, prior to this evening, I have no idea what he's been like this evening, but Neymar had spent 14 minutes on the ground in Russia. That's a record. Tony X says, Dan is being delightfully clear and perspicacious tonight, but one thing he missed out. What satisfies the Conservative Party will never satisfy the EU, as it always was. We need a Labour government as soon as possible. I did think that Dan was delightfully clear and perspicacious. He's no fool, is Dan Hodges, whatever other differences I have with him. But when he predicted that the cabinet will emerge intact and that the EU may accept Theresa May's compromise. He was sticking his neck out a bit, especially on the latter point. Fra says, what concessions or demands have the DUP forced from May and co? Will the government collapse if all of the cabinet does not accept the DUP preconditions on Brexit, like no border in the Irish Sea? Well, we'll see. I think at 9 o'clock the embargo is broken. Darren Rose says, great way to spend a Friday night listening to GG. Usually I have to catch up during the week on YouTube while driving. Although great company, it's nothing compared to listening live and taking part. Best show by far on the airwaves. Thank you very much for that, Darren. I appreciate that drive safely. We've got Lou Macari, the Celtic and Manchester United legend and Scotland legend, coming up after the break to talk about the different way, shall we say, that the World Cup is being viewed in different parts of the United Kingdom. John Hodgkins says, great show as always. Sadly, I predict the forthcoming anti-Trump get-together is likely to be dominated by the Polly Toynbee-inspired Russophobe liberal elite. It's all wrong. We know Trump is a foul-mouthed, bigoted moron, but George W. Bush was a million times worse. Just ask the friends and relatives of the countless dead people his wars were responsible for. Very well said, John. I ain't marching with no Polly Toynbees. Linda says, talk, evening GG. Now thought, what deal did Cameron go cap in hand for first time around? Well, maybe a deal to keep them, that's Buck Pal lot, Tories, cronies in charge forever, for slidebacks on the EU rules and regs. Hope the EU said small chance of that. We'll see. It's 2018 now. And finally, Bob Justice on the Twitter. It's doubtful any of the cabinet cowards will take the walk of shame. Bit of advice though, don't pick up any cigarette dimps. Swap those smart watches for dumb ones. Take the hands off too. These people ain't even right twice a day, as proved by Esther. Who's Esther? Bob, further and better particulars. Let's take a break and then the news headlines with David Dom. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the Open University of the airwaves. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You call us, we'll call you back. It won't cost you more than a penny or two. You can email me, you can text me, you can tweet me for free at George Galloway, at Talk Radio. The legend that is Lou Macari is up next.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
It's bigly fine.
On Talk Radio.
So very great.
Lou Macari was a man that I spent my formative years singing his name at Celtic Park, and then when he moved to my English team, Manchester United, it was like a dream come true for me, a hero going from one of my teams to the other. I've since gotten to know him a little, and I know him as much more than a footballer, a man who's a legend in the city of Stoke, where he does fantastic work with homeless people. But I thought of him tonight because I've been following the controversy that Andrew Neil was involved in when Andrew pointed out that he was supporting England in the World Cup, and why not, he said. This led to, what we could say a feeding frenzy in parts of the Scottish media and amongst many Scottish football fans. And so I got to thinking about my own situation too. And I wanted to talk it through with Lou, who's going to be my psychologist for the evening. Lou Macari, welcome to the show.
Evening, George.
Lou, I'll tell you what I mean by psychologist, because although I hate nationalism, I hate Scottish nationalism, I hate British nationalism, I haven't entirely thrown off a sense of, uncomfortableness at the thought that England now look like a pretty good bet to win the World Cup. What's your take on it?
There's a long way still to go, George. I certainly wouldn't jump to that conclusion.
No.
But one thing is certain, and we can't obviously deny it, they've done a lot better than everyone expected. They've gone out there and given their all in every game. which you can't say about some of the countries, George. I could name three. Germany, awful.
Yep.
Argentina, shocking.
Yep.
Brazil, even worse. England have had a go. They may get the reward of getting to the final. They may win it because it's an open competition. I've said all along, it's cup football. And we know what happens in cup football in England and in Scotland. You get plenty of shocks. And I think England have surprised everyone by the way they've played. It's been from an England point of view, it's been refreshing for them because they went to the competition with no chance at all, according to most people.
Oh, that is absolutely correct. Now, where does that leave thee and me as Scottish people who live in England with English neighbours and friends and workmates, and to whom England has been good? We've earned our living here, most of our lives, in fact. We've got players playing for England that we revere, support, cheer on every week. Why should a Scottish person living in England not support England in the World Cup?
There is no reason not to, George, unless England in the last number of games start doing what a number of teams have done, which is dive all over the place. If they started doing that, then I'd switch the television off. They're playing the game the way it should be played. They're going out there, they're giving their all, and it's been quite refreshing to see an England team go out there. Apart from penalty shootouts, we know about all that. That's been told to us for the last couple of days. They've won the first penalty shootout. But if they go out and play the game in the right way and they get the reward, I always want to see teams get the reward. I didn't want to see Germany make any progress. I thought they were awful. I thought Argentina were moody. And this Brazil team, anybody who's been fortunate enough over the years, like yourself and myself, George, to see great Brazil teams and great Brazil players, then this lot, I've got nothing to offer.
No, they're a pale shadow. Yeah, they're a shadow.
Some kids watching, George, might think, they're not bad, this Brazil team. They're awful compared to the teams we've seen.
That's right,
so, eventually, you want to see a team win the World Cup that maybe surprised everyone, that has been an underdog. And whether we like it or not, that is England. They've surprised everyone. They have been the underdogs coming into the competition. And they've done well up to now, but there's a long way still to go. There's a lot of football still to be played.
There is. Yeah. But they are playing with a kind of joy. They're playing in an uninhibited way. Our Manchester United players have played well, particularly Lingard, and so did Big Lukaku tonight. Yeah. It would appear, and Pogba earlier in the day. So, Manchester United have been well represented in the tourney, and they are in the England squad also. It just seems to me that it would be, and I agreed with Andrew Neil, it would be miserablest, it would be churlish for me to wish Sweden, for example, who are a boring workmanlike team, to beat England tomorrow. So I'll not be wearing a Viking hat tomorrow. Will you?
I think what you said, George, earlier on was correct. We've been down here for, 40-odd years, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
We've earned our living down here. We've been well looked after. We've been treated well. There's been no problems. Being a Scotsman and living
Not
in
at
Scotland.
all. On the contrary, the English people like Scottish people.
Yeah.
You actually get jobs. You get jobs for being Scottish.
So we've got nothing.
Back in Scotland, they're asking you if you're a Catholic, what team do you support?
They never asked me that, George. They knew what I was. I used to go to St Michael's Academy in Colwyn, that was my school, St Michael's. So,
but you see my point. They've never discriminated against us here. On the contrary, you switch on the radio, you switch on the television, there's Scots everywhere.
Well, and the only disappointment from the football point of view is there's not enough Scots in the English game anymore.
No, that's
true. The only disappointment.
Well, that is a marked difference. In your era, there was a great Scottish player in virtually every team, and in many teams, several. As well as great Scottish managers.
Yeah, well, when we talk about great Scottish managers, obviously you talk about Jock Stein, you talk about Bill Shankly.
Yep.
Matt
Busby, Alex Ferguson.
Alex Ferguson, possibly, and people will argue, the 4 greatest managers ever.
Yeah.
All Scots. So we've got a lot to be proud of, George. We've a lot to be proud of with our teams. Celtic, first British club to win the European Cup, and won it in style, and won it with, and deserved to win it.
Yeah.
And after that, Celtic get into another final a few years later. That's not happening anymore. So that's the only downside.
Well, that's what we should be looking at. Instead of wishing ill on England, we should be asking why our football is so much less than it was before.
Correct, George. I couldn't agree more with you. Forget about England. Worry about our own game. Ask the question why, during my time and years after it, there'd be 30, 40, 50 Scottish players a season coming to England. Now we get 1, possibly 2, because they're not, most of them are not good enough to play in the English league. That's English clubs have decided that. That's not me. That's English clubs have looked at the players and haven't gone and bought them. So you're right, George. Worry about our own game. Where are we going? Somebody said to me the other day, a Scottish lad that I know, do you think we'll ever qualify for the World Cup again?
Yeah.
I said, of course we will. But that's how poor we've done.
That's how poor we've got. And there's Uruguay with a population even smaller than ours. They're in the later stages of the World Cup every time.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head.
So
George.
it's not about size of population, because Uruguay have only got 3 million people.
No, it's not about size. It's about, is there enough youngsters coming through in the game, in the country where they're trying to develop with enough hunger, desire and commitment? And is there enough people like Stein, like Busby, like Alex Ferguson? And you know what they did, George? They drove them on. There was no nonsense. They didn't stand for any garbage. And as a result, we had hundreds of players. Well,
I tell you, finally, Lou, one of the things that most impressed me about Scott McTominay came from Jose Mourinho. He said, he was asked why he really seems to fancy McTominay, plays him regularly, and McTominay has just agreed to play for Scotland, by the way. He said, Scott McTominay comes in here, he's not got a big car, he's not covered in tattoos, he's not wearing big expensive watches, he's an ordinary guy who comes in to his work and puts in a proper shift at his work and isn't distracted in the way that many of these other young players are. That put McTominay up in my estimation, as well as Mourinho.
Yeah, well, I've witnessed that, George. I've been on the trips with United, with Scott McTominay. I've been to the training ground when they've trained. And when any young lad breaks into somebody's team, especially a Manchester United team, the first thing you're looking for, is there going to be a change in his attitude? Is he going to change overnight? Scott McTominay hasn't changed a bit. I don't think he ever will.
Fantastic.
He hasn't changed at all.
Lou, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, I've got some breaking news from Checkers. A new UK-EU free trade area for goods will be created under Brexit plans agreed by Theresa May and her ministers at Chequers today. However, after a day of crunch talks, the Cabinet agreed to step up preparations for a no-deal Brexit. The trade proposals mean the UK will have the same rules for all goods as it currently does as a member of the bloc. However, the government wants the UK to be free to diverge from EU rules over services, one of the biggest drivers of the UK economy. Well, here's my prediction. I tested Dan Hodges on this earlier. That proposal will not be accepted by the EU, and therefore they better step up their preparations for a no-deal Brexit.
Talk Radio. Dial up some dialogue.
Talk. Regret, maybe my treasure, or the price I have to pay. She may be the song.
I'm so sad about this news about Elvis Costello. I saw him in the 1970s. He's exactly the same age as me. when I lose weight, people say with my glasses and so on, have they ever been seen in the same room? I regard him as one of the most talented people that these islands have ever produced. A fantastic songwriter, a fantastic musician, and a fantastic performer. And I was going to be seeing him in Manchester, but he has understandably cancelled the tour because he's had an operation for a very aggressive cancer, and I really am praying for his survival. Let's hear from Stephen in Middlesbrough. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, George. Yeah, just on the Brexit, I think.
Yes.
I think Corbyn has to back it. I voted Remain myself because I was joked. But I think he should back it, and I think he'll win the next election if he does. I only voted Remain, George, because there wasn't enough left-wing voices. That Farage, like, I know you're mates with him sort of thing, but I can't stand them Rees-Mogg right-wing reactionaries who are just all over the telly. The great Bob Crow, God rest him, people like that. It would have been nice if he was there than yourself more. But
well, if Bob, God rest his soul, and Tony Benn, ditto, if they had been alive, they would have been leading the Brexit campaign.
Well, yeah, like you say, they were both against the EU. I thought it had its faults. I was disappointed Corbyn never backed Brexit as well. Very disappointed.
Well, he was up against force majeure in the Parliamentary Labour Party. I happen to think that Corbyn, and I'd be ready to say otherwise if it were so. I think Corbyn's played a blinder. Never interrupt your enemy while they're busy making a mistake was the dictum that Napoleon taught us, and it's true. Somebody said earlier that the Tory party is destroying itself over Brexit, to which I say, you say that as if it's a bad thing. If the Tory party destroys itself over Brexit, nobody in the world will be happier than me. But the people voted for Brexit, and they've got to be allowed to Brexit.
Oh, exactly. And like you said the other day, George, on Twitter, it'd be a disaster electorally if Labour don't honour it.
Well, look at the other way, Steve. If Corbyn were to be responsible for wrecking Brexit, then Labour MPs in their scores would lose their seats at the subsequent general election, because the Tories would run a khaki election saying, we tried to implement the referendum result that 17.5 million of you voted for. And by the way, you only need 12.5 million to win a general election. 17.5 million of you voted for Brexit. We tried, but Labour wrecked it in coalition with Liberals and the metropolitan elite. That would be a catastrophe for Labour in the industrial and post-industrial parts of the country. And 70% of all Labour-held constituencies voted for Brexit. So it would be a suicide mission for Corbyn to be held responsible for wrecking Brexit.
Oh, definitely. And like you pointed out as well in the past, rightly, George, all Corbyn and McDonald's policies in the EU wouldn't be allowed.
Exactly. They're forbidden by rule. Thanks, Stephen, for that excellent call. And your man's doing well, the manager of England, former Middlesbrough hero, of course. David M. says, George, I guessed as much, reformer tweet codger. So here's another thought. When, God willing, the latest couple recover, I wonder if they too will disappear, for their privacy, of course, and thereby not be accessible to scrutiny. Great show, as always, the only show worth listening to. P.S. Re Novichok 1. Gregory Copley, Defence and Foreign Affairs, had an interesting take on this, as was outlined on the John Batchelor show a day or so after the story broke. He theorised the link between Skripal and Christopher Steele, OBIS Intelligence Services, and the Trump dirty dossier. Don't I know it, David? Don't I know it? Thanks, pal. Bob says it's doubtful any of the cabinet cowards will take the walk of shame. Oh no, I've already done that one. It's very good. Tom Jarvis says, evening Gigi, has Dan Hodges been on the ale tonight? He just conducted an entire interview and not mentioned Corbyn once. He's all right. Look, he'll recover from that mania. David Leviscont says, Novichok apparently can be a binary two-part agent, both parts being fairly unremarkable. Could even be an accident. one part, the more obscure chemical, spread around, with the other being more common and maybe even in something that you could buy. It was interesting, the professor's point about the weed killer, which has a striking similarity to the making of Novichok. Now, give me some calls, will you? 0344 499 1000. I know you're all still celebrating Belgium's great victory. Eddie in Islington, N1 in London, says, George, what saddens me is that Labour has gone down the same route as 95% of the media and chief lies the government with their tsunami of propaganda and smears against Russia. As you've said, George, there is no chance that Russia is responsible. Bring in Crime Watch, maybe not. Keep it up, George, and the truth will finally come out. Thanks, Eddie. I don't say there's no chance that Russia is responsible, but I think they're the least likely suspects. Truth Tweet says, if England doesn't win, we can always blame Russia. Well, Jeremy Vine put out an extraordinary tweet yesterday with all the majesty of his position in the BBC. I was astounded. He put out a tweet containing a claim by a Mr. Lucas, who was described as a Russia expert, who said, and I paraphrase, that there was nothing to stop Russia poisoning the England football team in such a way as to slow them down. And I tweeted at Jeremy Vine, whom I like. I said, did you really just write that? This has been the greatest World Cup in living memory, if not in all time. England are one of the reasons for the success of the World Cup. The English fans have been cosseted, looked after, loved by the Russian people and their authorities, despite the acres of propaganda attacks on Russia. And I just was astonished that a BBC grandee like Jeremy Vine would put that out. Terry Eaton says, the establishment will always pull together against the people because, as you said earlier, we are not citizens, we are subjects. Wayne Mack says, just another random thought in this Novichok Gate saga, George. I wonder if any nosy domestic pets are being walked, or squirrels, birds, ducks have been found lying dead in droves in Salisbury, Amesbury. What a very, very good point, Wayne. Kyle is in Rochdale. Let's hear what he has to say. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, hi, George.
Hi.
Well, funnily enough, I was asking about the Novichok thing because perhaps I'm being a bit sick about it. But what I don't understand is the people who have, and it's quite sad, obviously, the people now who've been poisoned, how come the original two spies, how come they're out and about? And I don't understand how the new people have come in contact with it if they've swept the area and got rid of everything.
Well, if you believe the Daily Mail, they picked up a dog end on the street and smoked it.
Right.
That is seriously what the Daily Mail is leading with. And there are idiots that believe that kind of thing.
It just seems a bit of a stretch to me.
Well, I mean, just think about it. If there's Novichok on the cigarette butt, that means the person who smoked the cigarette first is already dead.
Yeah, true.
If there's a syringe lying around, how come no squirrels, rats, mice, birds have not been near it? Why are they not dead? The guy in the house, the £274,000 house, mysteriously purchased or rented by an unemployed registered drug addict, whose friend began frothing at the mouth and being soaked in sweat. Why has he not been affected by it? There's something not right here, Kyle.
I was going to say it doesn't really add up to me. I can't fathom it out. But then I thought perhaps I was being a bit stupid.
No, look, neither thee nor me are biological biochemists. Although Tony X, the protest board, turns out to be, as well as being an international relations and international politics A-pass. But you and me are not. All we can do is apply what Tony calls Occam's razor. You've got to eliminate the least likely on the edge of that razor. You've got to cut away the least likely and ascertain the most likely, and the most likely isn't Russia.
No, I think you're. I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, an even better question is this, Kyle. How come you and I are the only people talking about this? How come how come these questions are not on everybody's lips? How come these questions are not on every radio show, every television show? Why aren't they on Newsnight? Why aren't they on the BBC? Why aren't they in the newspapers? Why is it only us, the students and teacher of the University of the Airwaves, that are discussing this? Why?
Well, I guess
Why?
I don't claim to be a genius, George, but that was the first thing I thought when I saw the story earlier in the week. I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense to me. But
I'll tell you where else it doesn't make sense is in Salisbury, because I know people in Salisbury who've got their ear to the ground in Salisbury, and unbelievably, virtually nobody in Salisbury believes the British government in this. After all, they had Prince Charles and Camilla cavorting around in that square just a couple of weeks ago. Theresa May was fist-bumping people there. But lo and behold, there was Novichok lying around, waiting for somebody to stumble on it.
Right, it's lucky then that it wasn't near them, wasn't it? I had a second question, George.
Go ahead.
All right. It's only a quick one.
Yeah.
I've just seen it's just flashed up on my little news alert, and I generally don't know your view on it about the deal has just been done for the soft Brexit with Theresa May.
No, it's not. No, the deal hasn't been done. The British position has been established. Now it's got to go to the EU. No, the deal far from being done. The British position, I read it out as breaking news just 5 minutes ago, that has been established and nobody has walked. There's nobody looking for a taxi outside Chequers, apparently. But whether the EU will accept that, I personally don't believe they will.
Do you think there'll be more trouble to sort of come ahead for Theresa May if it's not agreed or the splits appear?
I think we'll have a no-deal Brexit, which is what we should have had right from the beginning, in my view. Kyle in Rochdale, many, many thanks for your call. Nikki says, George, you're spot on about both Novichok incidents, as you were about Syria and many other stories that the mainstream media got very wrong. When are you going on Jamal Thomas's show? I don't know, Nikki. Ask my agent, i.e. my wife. Darren Rose says, I too have the football on mute and listening to the University of the Airwaves. Fantastic listening.
After you cried and why you lied to me.
Tell me why you lied to me. That's appropriate. The Beatles. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You call us now, we'll call you back. If you disagree with me, if you're a woman caller, if you're a first-time caller, your call will be prioritised. John Smith says it's not Russophobia, it's the dislike of dictator Putin. Big difference. And Dr. James Lucht, Luchte, says, George, could we have a moment of silence for Julia Skripal's cat and guinea pigs? And Tony says, like you, I don't gamble, but I told everyone who'd listen that England would win this World Cup. So far, so good. Well, Tony, you'd have got a good price for that. Hedy says, may I say Mohammed and his rap was an excellent caller. Neymar is no more. Yeah, he was very, very good, Mohammed. Jemsky Sokolov says, listening to Galloway, first time on a Friday evening. Brilliant. Novichok too. Thank you for that. And Fihel says, it was Aggie from How Clean Is Your House? Squirt on Novichok, rinse with water. Nice, clean, shiny knob. Ooh, missus. Well, they started it. Tony says, I'm Welsh, as you know, and I'm fully behind England in this World Cup. You mentioned churl, and Twitter is full of it from some of the more grumpy citizens of the other nations of the UK. I sincerely hope the England team bring football home. Well, I just think it is churlish to admire Manchester United, Liverpool, Tottenham, as I do, in the way that I do, and yet wish their players to fall flat on their face on the world stage. Why would you do that unless you were a nationalist? And I ain't. Mike is in Newcastle, Staffordshire. He's on the line now. Mike, go ahead.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'm sure you know about this, but I'd like to discuss it with you. Dr. Stephen Davis, the consultant in emergency medicine at Salisbury Hospital.
Is he the one who wrote the letter to the Times?
Yeah, I've got it here. No patients, he says, no patients have experienced symptoms of nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury, and there have only ever been 3 patients with significant poisoning. So he's saying there was no nerve agent poisoning.
And he's a consultant, and he didn't write a letter to the Times loosely.
It was on March the 16th, so he had some time to think about it.
Yes, and consultants don't write letters to the Times loosely. Has he ever said anything more about the phraseology that he used in that letter?
Not that I know
of. And why have no journalists asked him about that? You see, this takes me back to the leitmotif of this show. Why has no journalist said, what did you mean by that letter? The government says they were victims of nerve agent poisoning. Why did you say there were none?
Yeah, exactly. But it's all full of... I mean, nothing is public about this thing, is it? Nothing is public. Everything is...
Utterly opaque.
Concealed, yeah. So, what do you think?
Well, I've said all along, and I'm saying it now even more so with, if you'll forgive the pun, with knobs on. I have no idea what went on here. I just apply what I now know to be Occam's razor, that the Russian state had no motive, not the only motive, they had no motive to carry this attack out, and everything about the attack screams, I am not being carried out by a highly trained, 10-year programmed professional assassin. If it had been a professional assassin, they'd have put an ordinary, common or garden bullet in the head of the man. That way, nobody would ever have been able to scream, it was Russia what did it.
I mean, if this is so poisonous, they wouldn't have had time to administer any antidote, would they? I mean,
well, I'm working on the assumption that Putin first elaborated. If they were struck by a Russian military-grade nerve agent, they would be dead. So far, 4 people have been struck by it, and none of them are dead. That doesn't add up.
And every time there's a problem, the poison fairy pops up for May, doesn't it? I mean, they're having a wonderful time in Russia. All the critics are being confounded. It's so convenient, isn't it? And you've got this, another thing, I haven't seen much about this, but there's apparently a Syrian soldier was killed by a British bomb the other day. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, what the hell are we doing? Spending our taxes, sending bombs to wherever they are, and then they use them to kill Syrian soldiers.
Look, our Defence Secretary, Pike. Don't tell him your name, Pike. He's demanding 20 billions more. 20 billions more.
Across the UK, online and on D.
Understand, 'cause I've been in love before, and I found that love was more than just holding hands.
Takes me back. Mark says, first time listening live, much more enjoyable than catching up via YouTube. I just wanted to say thank you, George, for giving the masses an anchor of sanity. You're the only presenter I genuinely look forward to listen to. Long live George Galloway and long live the mother of all talk shows. Thank you very much, Mark. Beautifully said. Let's hear from the beautiful Norma in Bristol, because no show is complete without her voice. Norma, go ahead.
I tell you what, with tennis, football, hot weather, poor breathing, I'm feeling quite happy.
I'm very glad you're here.
No, it's a rather funny one, really. On the local news tonight, I just heard a little bit. We've got drunk seagulls in the West Country, and they are being sorted out. And I just thought, well, perhaps they were near the English fans who pour their beer over each other when we win. The thing is, Do they not have seagulls in Salisbury who may not be very well because they're licking novichok?
The only animals that have died in Salisbury are the ones that the police stood outside the door as they starved to death, starved of food and water.
Yes, I
Two
know.
guinea pigs and a luxury Persian cat were
Have you ever
allowed
heard
to
of
starve
seagulls?
themselves to death without anybody, even though the vet informed them. The Salisbury 3 are 2 guinea pigs and 1 cat.
Yeah, that's sad. But have you ever heard of drunk seagulls before?
No, but I did see that story.
Did
Drunk
you?
seagulls. Maybe, seagulls. How far on the wing is it from Wiltshire to Bristol? Is it flying distance?
Oh, gosh, yes. It's not that far away, Salisbury, from Bristol, no.
Maybe these seagulls have been at the Novichok.
Oh, dear. Anyway, I think it's the beer.
Thank you very much, Norma. Lovely to hear from you. Now, Bob solves the mystery of who Esther is. Esther, that'll be the friend of the poor, Esther McVeigh, the woman who claims a £400 a month food allowance. I think a severely disabled person gets about 300, not just for food, but to live on. It's like Esther said, we're all having to pay this 1.5 trillion back. How wonderful. Here's Joe in Blantyre. Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate.
I heard you say earlier when you were talking to Lou McCarry.
Yes.
I was a wee bit disappointed that you were saying how you should be supporting England because both you and Lou have lived there for 40 years.
Yes.
The implication being that if you hadn't lived there and you were still in Scotland, you maybe wouldn't be supporting them.
No, that was only one of the reasons. It was the reason to support my point that it would be churlish to sit with a Viking hat on in England tomorrow, hurting the feelings of my neighbours.
No, I completely agree, but I also think that these days it seems to me that it's getting worse, the anti-English feeling in Scotland. At least
Bound to with the rise of nationalism, isn't it?
Well, if there is a rise in nationalism, I suppose you would argue there is because there's...
Well, you've got 40% of people voting to break up the country.
Is that higher than it's been in the past?
I think so, yeah. In the past, when I left Scotland, you would have put the nationalist figure at around 20%, 25% tops. So it's definitely gone up, Joe. I don't think it'll go above 50%, but 40% is not that far away from 50, so you can never be complacent.
True. On that point, what did you think of the SNP MPs and their behaviour the other night when they were forcing the English MPs and English staff to miss the England match?
Not just doing it, but boasting about it, sending out tweets, boasting that they had done it, forcing the staff and the MPs to miss England's penalty goals, deliberately timing their calling of votes to do so. I just thought it was so puerile, it could only have been done by the SNP. Puerility is their middle name.
Yeah, well, I can't say whether I agree or disagree, but some take the view that the SNP in Westminster are deliberately trying to wind everyone up to perhaps provoke the English into maybe wanting rid of us. And
in a way, that is their shtick, isn't it? They hope that people will tire of Scotland in the way that people have tired of the north of Ireland. Most people in Britain, if they could vote, would say Ireland should be reunited. We don't want Paisley and his bigots coming over here dictating what should happen in this country. And I think part of the SNP shtick is to replicate that in relation to Scotland. But despite everything, as I said and agreed with Lou, actually English people really like Scottish people. That's what makes the puerility all the harder to bear. Joe, thanks for your call. Nigel is on from Temple Fortune, one of the legends of the past. Go ahead, Nigel.
Hi, George. Good evening. Thank you for that. Nice to speak to you. First of all, I share your warm sentiments about Elvis Costello. May God bless him and give him a speedy recovery from what is a most terrible, terrible.
It came out the blue for me. I knew nothing about it, and I had intended seeing him in Manchester.
Yeah, I was in the newsroom this morning. It came up a PA snap. So it was pretty devastating for a lot of people, I can tell you. But I wanted to talk about the Novichok story.
Yeah.
And for me, this is one of the most fascinating stories of the year. It's a tremendous story. It's awful, but it's just so engaging. I think for me, there's a number of questions. First of all, why have two separate couples in a space, I think, less than 15 miles from each other, been struck by this poison?
Yeah.
Now, the first one we're saying that they believe were targeted. Now, I don't know, but it's very unusual to have another couple seemingly just getting caught up in this. I believe that possibly they were targeted. And the reason I say that is this. If they weren't targeted, why is it that no other people in that area have been contaminated by this poison? That's the first question. And the second question is, are we going to start looking at the security services and the government for not clearing up what may have been left behind, which is another question. But I think my first question is the one that I think needs to be answered. I don't think any government can answer it or will ever answer it.
Well, what I'd like is the bank of remaining journalistic talent in this country to be investigating these very points. But it's one of the most grievous features of this affair is that they will not do so. I mean, in the past, Nige, the Sunday Times Insight team would be outside the door of the £274,000 house that the unemployed drug addict is living in and appears to have purchased, and they'd be telling us how he managed to purchase it. But I can bet my bottom dollar that that will not be what the Sunday Times Insight team is doing this evening. And ditto for the Daily Mirror, ditto for the Daily Mail.
Well, I actually haven't been down there on this story. I've been doing other things in London, but I can tell you that there are news teams doorstepping, as we call it in our trade, looking at other aspects, looking at many other aspects. But of course, there's lots of security cordons in place where they actually just cannot get to. But I think it's going to unravel, and I think it's going to unravel to be rather a fascinating story. Because, how can just another couple who are seamlessly, completely innocent, suddenly get contaminated and no one else in that area, no one else at all has been contaminated or affected by this poison? It's astonishing. I don't believe a used syringe, a cigarette butt, or whatever it may be, was left on the ground. And what's interesting also for me is when you remember, going back to the first case when the chief medical officer came out and said, there's nothing to worry about, the area is safe. And of course, two or three weeks later, get your baby wipes out, wipe your things down, dispose of it correctly, tell the police where you've been if you've been in those areas. So I don't think the chief medical officer knows what's going on, really.
Nigel, great call. Great call, and I hope you're right about the news teams. Thanks very much indeed. Andrew says on SMS, Dear George, I just want to express my gratitude to you and Talk Radio for your collective courage in the face of a corrupt MSM and a burgeoning police state. Thank you, Andrew. Fergal Leddy says, all hail Norma on Talk Radio with George Galloway. What a charming lady. And Patrick Vidine says, great show as ever, GG. The fabrications of the UK government and paymasters are starting to unravel. Without even considering Wiltshire poisonings, now that the OPCW have confirmed that there was no chemical weapon attack in Douma, there needs to be resignations and ultimately a public inquiry. Let's hear from Pat in Stepney. Go ahead, Pat.
Good evening, George.
Evening, sir.
It's about Brexit. I believe that you're right, that we will end up with no deal because these people are in, they can't be moved. These people will not have a sensible debate about, giving us a reasonable deal.
Well, there are contradictions, you see, Pat. We want to be free to make trade deals with the rest of the world. Otherwise, what's the point of Brexit?
Well, no point.
And the EU cannot accept that we can, what they would call, cherry pick. We can effectively stay in a new customs free trade area, whilst making separate deals with other countries that are different and hopefully better than theirs. How could they accept that? That cuts away at the very cornerstone of their stand. Secondly, we, at least according to Dan Hodges, though not the breaking news statement that I read out earlier, we cannot accept that the European Court will remain the Supreme Court for any British legal matter. And why would they allow us to opt out of that but remain in effectively a customs union with them? The same goes for free movement of labour, which is the big enchilada. The British people will never accept a continuation of us being forced by EU rules to accept any citizen of the European Union who wishes to coming to join the labour market here. That was the main reason why we voted Brexit.
Well, the reason why I voted Brexit was to right a constitutional wrong that has been down the years with various prime ministers who signed EU treaties without a mandate from the people.
Yeah.
That was the reason why I voted
you and me both.
Brexit.
You and me both. But the rest of the 17.4 million were principally motivated by not accepting that we could be governed by people that we didn't vote for and couldn't remove, that we would be governed by courts that were not appointed by us through our elected representatives, but were appointed by other people in other countries. And thirdly, that they would not accept that there would be a potentially unlimited number of East and Central European poor workers coming here in the absence of proper trade unions, in the absence of proper trade union laws, in the absence of a government that would intervene to ensure that there would be no undercutting, that the cheap labour would undercut the existing labour. That's what people voted for.
Well, it goes back to what I said and what you agreed with, that in my opinion, our membership was illegal because the people that signed, the person that signed the 1972 Communities Act, the Maastricht Treaty, the treaties of Nice, Amsterdam and Lisbon, they should have had a mandate from the people either by referendum or general election, but they wouldn't give it to the people because they knew that the people wouldn't vote, that the people would vote against them.
Pat, I'm with you 100%. Pat in Stepney, probably the last call of the evening. The great Ian Lee is up after me. Let me try and make a dent, at least, in the huge social media response to the show. Tyler Durden says Corbyn has been anti-EU and pro-Brexit, but since becoming Labour leader, he's not honest and direct about it. London, its metropolitan elite and identity politics won't make him PM, ever. And Graham in Amesbury says, nice walk around Novichok Close this evening, George. I'm not sure why there's so many fire engines, but anyway, I confess I dismissed your views about Porton Down a few months ago, but now I'm not so sure. Graham in Amesbury, that's the most welcome text of the night. And Think for Yourself says, according to reports, Elvis Costello cancer is aggressive but small and seems to have been caught early. Thank God for that. Tyler Durden says antics, theatrics and cheating sometimes do cost South American teams matches. Brazil had a clear penalty, shamefully not given by the VAR team, probably due to earlier cheating tactics by players like Neymar. Congratulations, Belgium. Brazil, unlucky. I didn't see it, actually, so I can't comment. It's a bit of an Arsene Wenger, that, isn't it? I didn't see nothing. Damien says, I think you've involved in this conspiracy, George, because you've mentioned squirrels, rats, birds and mice, but not a mention of the guinea pigs or a cat. Very suspicious. Damien, you spoke too soon. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, join me on Monday morning at 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. Monday morning, I'm in for Mike Graham, I guess, for one day only. And I've no doubt that this news story will have moved along nicely. It's been marvellous. Thanks for joining me.